when my wife and I decided to ride 2 Chinese delivery bikes through the length of Africa, from Cape Town to Cairo in Egypt, a lot of people said we'll never make it. And I must admit, I also had my doubts. Now, in this video, I want to share some of the highlights of our story and how we made it all the way to Cairo on 200cc Chinese road bikes. Hi, I'm Francois from adventurebiketroop.com. Now, in this video, I'm probably going to leave out a lot of stuff. I'm going to forget what I wanted to say because I just want to share some of the highlights of our trip. Now, unfortunately, back then, none of us, neither my wife or I, were making videos. We only just got a DSLR camera and we almost left it at home because we didn't have enough space to pack it. So in the end, she convinced me to take the camera with. So I had to hang it on my body for 3 full months in all the weather, etc. So we took a lot of photos, but unfortunately we don't have much video material. So this is going to be more like a slide show, but I'm going to share you some of the highlights and hopefully you'll find it interesting. Now, this story started when we got married. I had an old XT500. Soon after, I bought a KLR and we did a weekend trip. My wife got a little bit interested in bikes, and about a year later, we decided to drive or ride around South Africa. So that's about 6,000 kilometers or about 4,000 miles on 2 125cc Chinese road bikes. So this was my wife's very first time riding her own motorcycle. So after that, she really loved it. So we got bigger bikes. I had a KLR 650 at the time. She bought a BMW Fundero. That was the only bike she could actually put her feet on the ground. And so we did a couple of trips, more a week, maybe 2 weeks. Usually we took some backup vehicle. My brother drove his 4x4, and we took friends. And then we decided, no, we want to go through the whole of Africa. So we approached the company where we bought the first 125cc Chinese bikes from, and they offered us 200cc bikes to ride through Africa. Now, on the forums, when I mentioned this, a lot of people said, no, you won't even make it out of the country. So I must admit we were a bit nervous, but we were determined to try, and if all else fails, we would just fly home. It's no big deal. So we got the bikes about 2 weeks before our departure. We didn't plan much. I'm not lying when I say 2 months before our departure date, we really started our planning. So we started finding out about visas, international driving licenses. There's a document, the Carnet de Passage, that you need to take to get your vehicles across the borders, vaccinations, etc. So this all started 2 months before our departure date. And so it didn't really feel like we did much planning. And when we got the bikes, we had 2 weeks to fit 12-volt accessory plugs. We fit the Japanese chains. Hopefully they would last longer. And we had to fit our GPS, etc. So really we didn't have much time. We also had to decide how to take extra fuel with. So the initial thought was, because they only had 10-liter tanks, so that's about 2.5 gallons. So I wanted to take these jerry cans, 5-liter jerry cans with, but on a small little Chinese bike, there's just absolutely no way to fit this big, heavy thing on it. So in the end, we opted for these military-grade plastic fuel bladders. Now, these days, they make much better ones. There's links in the description. You can also check out my recommended gears page, adventurebiketroop.com/recommended gear, stuff that we like to use. So we prepared our bikes, and I also had this crazy idea, and this was literally 3 days before we left, that I wanted to start from the racetrack, that's Killarney racetrack in Cape Town. So those of you who've seen Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman's Long Way Down, they started from Silverstone. So I emailed the racetrack expecting them to say no or laugh at me, and they immediately said yes. And so we ended up sleeping the night on the racetrack the first night. We got McDonald's on our way there through the drive-through, and the next morning we did a couple of laps and we were off. So, yeah, so that was awesome. And I learned there that if you don't ask, you'll never get your yes. So our first day was quite a long day in the saddle, and everything went smoothly, and we actually made it across the border, no problems. That was about 400 miles in the first day on those small little bikes, and they would barely run in. I mean, we had about 200 kilometers on the clock, and I made a point of it to change the oil at 20 k's, so about 7-8 miles, and then again at around 100 miles I changed the oil, and then from there on throughout the trip, every 2,000 kilometers, or that's about 750 miles. No, that's not right. 1,200 miles I changed the oil just to keep the engines alive, because I was sure something's gonna break on this trip. And remember, we're riding flat out, so maximum speed is about, what's that in miles per hour? It's 110 kilometers per hour I reached once, but mostly about 100 kilometers per hour, so that's about 62 miles per hour. That was our maximum speed. Cruising speed more like a 50 miles per hour. So anyways, the bikes were really working hard, and we had a lot of luggage. We use soft luggage, and you can also see that in the description below. Hard luggage will obviously not fit onto these small little road bikes. We also wore all the gear, so we had to decide, are we going to? So in the end, we said yes. Our rule is all the gear all the time. So I had these big BMW adventure bike boots. We also took our lead braces, neck braces, and something else I had was a camelback on the front like this to drink water, and with our GoPro and cell phones, etc. And then a backpack on my back with our laptop and the rain gear, etc. So we really fully packed, and that was every single day. Now, we didn't stay over for more than one night at any of the places. So it was mostly camp for the night, move on the next day. So over the 90 days, I'd say about 10 of those were doubling up. So really, we were on the road quite a lot. Then in Windhoek, so that's the capital of Namibia, in the middle of the desert, we had a chat with a reporter for the local newspaper, and she told us in the next town, a couple of weeks before, a tourists were held at gunpoint in their rooftop tent of their 4x4. And now we had to go the same route, and now we're a little bit paranoid. We're still getting comfortable up here in Africa. My wife's first time out of the country, really, or up in Africa, really, out of South Africa, apart from being overseas. And so in Otjiwarongo, this is the small little town, there's only one campsite, and this is by chance the campsite where this the robbery was a couple of weeks before. Now, there weren't any people there, so we packed out all our stuff, all the electronics, laptops, cameras, GPS, for everyone to see, but we didn't really see people around. There's one or two cars there in the chalets. And that night in the shower, I overheard some locals chatting about going out for the evening. And when I came out, they stopped me next to their car without a number plate. And the one guy opened the boot and he asked me whether we can do business. And I'm like, no, we're tourists. And he showed this big diamond ring and a whole bag full of small stones. And he wanted to give the diamonds to me, and then I must ship the money back to him when I sell it. And I'm like, no, thanks. And I can see he's the main man overhearing this, and he's annoyed about this guy oversharing their stuff. And so I just wanted to get out of there. And so the next morning at 4 o'clock, we just left the campsite while it was still dark. Because the paranoia was really amplified, being exposed on your little bike. You can't lock up anything. And we were alone in the camp with these guys. But in the end, nothing happened. Then a couple of days later, that was in the northern part of Namibia, the Caprivi Strip. There was one day that we struggled to find signal, because we decided to blog every single day. You can check it out at crossingafrica.co.za. It's also in the description below. So every single day we wrote the blog post on our little netbook. We had to find a data SIM card in each country, have it the settings verified or set up at the mobile store. And we had to find signal this one day. And it took us about 3 hours to drive into a lodge to use their Wi-Fi and come back out. So we were fed up, It was sand. My wife fell in the sand. The locals laughed at us. And in the end, we were so tired, and we got back to where we started that morning, completely demotivated. And guess who we ran into? Here's Charlie Boorman from a long way down, standing at the filling station, filling up his GS. And so we had a chat and told him about our story and asked him for advice on the trip ahead, because we were basically doing their trip in reverse. So we were really lucky on this trip. Then in Zambia went well. On the last day in Zambia, that was actually their national elections, we actually saw the president coming in at the lodge, because they didn't know the owners, but we didn't meet him. We saw this whole entourage of cars coming in. It was election day, and he was voted out that day. Anyways, the owners there told us to be careful of the next country, Malawi. We always heard, be careful of the next country. So they said, no, there's no fuel in Malawi. There's riots in Lilongwe. You won't make it. So we filled up these bags of ours, the extra bags. It's about 7 extra liters. So we could do about 400 miles with the tank and the bag each. In the end, there were no problems in Malawi. We had a lovely camp next to the Lake Malawi. It's like white sandy beaches. It looks like the ocean. And the last day in Malawi, we camped at Sangita Lodge. That's actually the place where Ewan's wife fell with a 650 BMW on the long way down. And the owner there told us to go on the western side of Tanzania, so that's the next country. Instead of going to Dar es Salaam on the highways with all the trucks and buses, and that is really the danger in Africa, is the way people drive and the traffic. They just absolutely ignore bikes. Because you're the smallest, you have to always give way. So he said, no, the western Tanzania used to be a dirt road, but it should be tarred by now, and that it'll take us a day or two to get to Rwanda, where we were headed. So our first night in Tanzania, we spent at a coffee lodge, Utengule Coffee Lodge in Mbeya. And the next morning, we had to go and register our data SIM again to use the SIM card in Tanzania. So we left there at about 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, went through Tunduma. It's really, it's not the most beautiful town. It's actually it's a border town, just traffic everywhere. They drive on the wrong side of the road, across the road, this way and that. It's just a mess. And so we left there out of Tunduma about 3 o'clock. So we had 2 hours of sunlight left and 200 kilometers to the only town on the map on that route. But now, because this guy said it was tarred, we thought, well, if we go a little bit after dark, it's fine, but we'll just gun it on this new tar road. And in the end, it hasn't been tarred yet. So it just turned into a nightmare. It was about 8 o'clock that night when, first of all, we couldn't get water. So we had to stop at a well there to get water from locals. And I was trying my best Zulu, and they speaking Swahili, and we couldn't understand. But in the end, we got our water. Now we're looking for a place to camp, but there's just people everywhere you stop. And so we ended up reaching Lalibela, a small little town, at 8 o'clock at night. And this was just the worst place ever. Just people drinking and trucks, and there was no place to stay. And they just said, no, we must keep moving. And so this was 8 o'clock, and we still had about 100 or something kilometers to go. And it's a bad road. Every couple of kilometers, one of us would fall, or we'd go off the road when a bus comes racing from the front without lights. And every time we stopped to see if we can camp there, someone would pop up with a cell phone light and wonder who we are. And they were so afraid of us because we've got our helmets and all our gear and stuff. And we would ask, can we sleep here? And they would say, no, you must keep moving. And in the end, we got to Sambawanga. So this is the town we were heading for. And this was 11:45 at midnight. And we were so relieved to enter town. And then I realized, well, where the hell do you find a place that's still open that time of night in this small town? So we drove around town, thought we'll sleep at a gas station. And in the end, we found a church, a Moravian church center. And the guy was so helpful. He took our gear and shown for us. And we ended up staying 2 days servicing the bikes. And because we fell a couple of times, so I had to fix some stuff. It's basically bulbs that blew, etc. But anyway, so that was the golden rule really in Africa or anywhere, is not to drive after dark, and here we miserably failed with that one. Anyhow, that section that he said, the guy at Singita Lodge said, is going to be a day's ride, ended up being 7 days of mud and dirt and corrugations. And on one section, we were in the middle of nowhere. It's just like a forest with a dirt road. My bike cut out. It would start and then immediately die again. So I took off the seat, changed the CDI, did a couple of things there, looked for fuses. I didn't know what I was doing. I'm not a mechanic. And my wife mentioned something about dirty fuel. And I'm like, oh yeah, it could be Malawi's dirty fuel, because we had to fill up from cans in Malawi. So I managed to get the bike started when I drained the carburetor a bit, and we made it to the next town. So the next morning, again, bike's dead. So I managed to clean the carburetor, but I somehow damaged the float. And so it would keep overflowing from the overflow. So I had to close the tap, open the tap, close the tap. And so we rode back to town and found the first guys that looks like they can work on bikes. So they had this little shack workshop thing, and they quickly ripped out the carburetor, off on their bike, came back with a carb kit for the same bike. That's the awesome thing about these Chinese bikes. They're all through Africa, so you can buy exactly the same spares. It's the same brand, or the same bike, just a different brand, just different stickers on. So anyway, so they replaced the float. The guy put me on the back of my bike. I was a bit apprehensive, and we just raced through town because he wanted to prove that the bike's fine now. And it ended up costing something like $10, and so we were off again. Then we went through Rwanda. We were nearly arrested there because we had black plastic bags over our sleeping bags because it was raining, and you're not allowed plastic in the country at all. So the police were quite serious, quite adamant. So luckily they let us go. But that was a bit weird. But Rwanda is an amazing place. There's traffic lights that count down to green, and everything's beautifully clean. It's like a first world city in this small little country in the middle of Africa. So we went to watch the gorillas in Rwanda, rode through Uganda. It was just rain, 4 days of rain. So I can't remember. There's nothing else really to tell about Uganda. It's just rain. And then we got into Kenya, where we had to get our visas for Sudan, because you can only get your visas for Sudan closer to the time, because it expires after 2 months. So we could get Uganda, Ethiopia, and Egypt at home, and then Sudan we had to get in Kenya, but then we didn't realize it's a public holiday the next day. So we ended up staying for 4 days to get our visas. But it was quick and easy to get the visa, but we had to wait to get the place open. And we also knew the next section would see us go through the Shelby Desert. So this is bandit country. It's like volcanic rocks the size of cricket balls or hockey balls, I don't know, big balls, just everywhere. So 200 kilometers of this gnarly road. This is where Charlie's bike's suspension broke. Guys with Hilux came down, their suspension broke. We chatted to them. There's 3 guys from Holland, big, like on BMW 800s and a 660 Tenere. They had to put their bikes on a truck because it was too muddy. So now we had to drive our Chinese bikes up this road. So we thought, well, either we'll wait for someone to go with us, and that didn't happen. So the other option was to just put it on a truck, and because it's small and light, so we can put it on the truck and then drive this section with the local. But in the end, that wasn't necessary. We actually made it. We just stuck to 25 kilometers per hour. So that's about 10, 15 miles per hour. But the problem is we had to reach the border town, because there's not much on this side of the border to Ethiopia. On the other side, it's better. And we didn't know this, but we wanted to reach the border. So we left the JJ Center. So this is in almost the bottom half of the Shelby Desert at 7 o'clock in the morning. I still don't know why we didn't leave at 5. But anyway, 7 o'clock. Then I fell at about 20 miles per hour. There was a ditch in the road, and I grabbed the front brake. And with the slight slope, it just slipped. And I was already jittery because you know about the bandits. 2 weeks before, they actually shot a Frenchman through his cheek. He was alive, but they shot him through his cheek and he just kept driving. So we knew this story. We read it all over the internet. So now I fall and I just grabbed a bunch of salt, rubbed it into the open wound because my jacket pulled open, and got back on the bike and just said to Tanya, go, 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 go. And we were about 2 hours before the border. This is close to Ethiopia now. This is also a section that they said don't stop there. We got a flat. So my wife got a flat. It was a piece of glass stuck in a tire. And when I got out the pump, it just mud and water came out of my little hand pump. I wrote an article on pumps as well. You can go and check it out in the description below. And so there was no way I could fix the tire. And then a family came down. They were driving down from the UK. They left everything behind, and the plan was to go and work at some prison in, I can't remember where, Uganda or somewhere. So they helped us, which put them in danger because they had to then sleep next to the road somewhere. And we managed to keep going, and we reached Moyale about 10 minutes after the border closed. And now we had to find a place to stay. It's already dark. It's just people everywhere. This one weird lady climbed on top of my wife on her bike, grabbing handlebars. We had to push her off, and people were shouting at the policemen that wanted to watch our bikes, and they said he's a criminal. And so it was just a crazy. I don't want to swear on this channel, but yeah, it was just hectic. So we ended up finding a spot there. It was the worst place, but I think it cost about $2 per person per night. But they were cooking eggs in a pot in the hallway. There was a guy sleeping in the hallway between the rooms on a piece of cardboard. It's the locks of the doors has been broken so many times so you can see through the door. Inside the room, there were 2 little beds with mosquito nets, but they touched the bed. You can't. It was hanging in the middle, so wherever you lie, it touches your face. And the little room inside that should be the toilet had no toilet in it, no door, and just a bunch of rubbish, like garbage, was just thrown in there. So we had to sleep in this room. My wife even suggested we pitch the tent, and I was too lazy, so I said no. And 2 weeks later, I was still itching from the bed bugs. Anyways, the next morning we went through the border and everything went well again. We had to switch over to the right side of the road, which was weird for us. And about 5 k's into Ethiopia, we were stopped by 2 Germans, a guy and a girl, on DR 650s. And they just stopped us in the middle of the road, not even stopped going off the sides. And they was just say, is there a place to sleep on the other side of the border? And we said, yeah, maybe sleep on this side because the other side is the desert. And they said they were fed up with the country. They can't take it anymore. They just have to leave this place. And they were thrown with rocks. And we heard stories like this, but how bad could it be? So we just laughed and kept riding, and they were off. And it went fine for about a week and a half, and then we reached Lalibela. So we went to the northern part, those rock-hewn churches from the 11th or 12th century, and that's where it started. People in this rural area, they see you and they start throwing rocks. They would wait until you drive past and then grab a handful of gravel and just throw it. So my wife will always hit from behind because she was riding in behind. And sometimes they'll throw from it's like hundreds of yards away. They'll throw this big rock just in your direction. Or they would make faces, or the one guy was actually peeing there in the road and swung around and walked behind us, and the old lady with the umbrella would chase behind you. And this went on for about 3 or 4 days from there to Gondar in the west. It was just the weirdest thing because the people are nice. They're awesome up to that point. And there it was just this aggressiveness or energy. I don't know what it is. It's more like a habit instead of real aggression. We didn't feel unsafe, but it was just super annoying and a bit scary. Anyway, so we were also, when we reached Gondar, we were also just fed up and wanted to get out of the country. So the next country was Sudan. This is the one where a lot of people assumed we will just bypass Sudan, but there's no way. And how do you do Cape to Cairo without going through Sudan? So we only had 2 weeks in Sudan, the visa, and you can only leave on a Wednesday because you had to take the ferry. There's no road from Sudan to Egypt. You have to take the ferry. It's like a monopoly thing. So you have to leave on the Wednesday, so we had to enter on the Thursday. So we have 2 weeks in the country. And we heard horror stories about this border post, people getting stuck there for 4 days, not being able to get their stuff through. I think this is also where Ewan and Charlie actually had to camp at the border post for a day or two with all their gear to get the gear out. Anyways, we made it to the other side, and the police held us there in this room, and they didn't say why we had to wait, but we waited 3 hours there for something, and eventually they got their food out. So I was a bit annoyed, so I took out my food, and then they dragged a table and they washed our hands and they gave us food, and but it's the weirdest thing. They just gave us all the stuff, and they saw Tanya likes there's a sweet type of fudge thing. And when they saw she liked it, they just took a whole ice cream tub full of it and put it right in front of her. And so it was the weirdest thing. And when we were offered to pay afterwards, they said, no, welcome to Sudan. And the only reason why we were stuck there so long is they had to wait for someone else that had to issue a receipt. So it wasn't like they wanted to hold us. It was just the guy wasn't there. And when he came in, immediately he said, get up, you can go there, pay, and off we went. So, yeah, that was weird. And then every single time we stopped somewhere, there's these truck stops where they make tea and there's beans and it's usually a plate of either beans or insides of animals and raw onions. The raw onions were almost the nicest food. But anyways, so they would just give you this stuff, and when you offer to pay, there's no, welcome to Sudan. Or at a shop, they'll give you 2 bottles of water from the fridge, like cold water, and you want to pay, and they say no, welcome to Sudan. So or this one guy got on his phone and then gave the phone to me, and I'm like, okay, and I pick up the phone, and the guy said no, it's his brother gave him the phone, and he heard we're from South Africa, we want to drive to Cairo, and he said, how's your trip so far? And I said, no, it's been good. And he said, do you need anything? No, I'm fine. If you need something, phone me. And then he put down the phone, nothing else. So the hospitality in the country was just next level. And at hotels, when we wanted to put our bikes inside, they would just say, no one will touch it. And I tried this one night. I just left all my luggage on the bike outside in the street. Next morning, everything's still there. They promised me no one will touch it. So this was just the most insane place to be. And then after we left Khartoum, that's the capital, it's just desert there. Now this was tarred. Back when Ewan and Charlie did this was also a bad sandy desert road next to the train track. So this was tarred when we got there. And so we slept at the Meru pyramids. There's 200 of these small pyramids, and you could go in, but there's no real ticket gate or anything. There's no tourists. There's nothing there. So we slept next to these pyramids in the middle of the desert. No one bothering us. Well, the next morning when I woke up, I slept outside. My wife slept inside. It was quite windy. There was this guy on his donkey, and he had stuff to sell, like a cat skin to hold water and weird stuff. But anyways, yeah. So, but yeah, that was very weird. And then the second to last day in Sudan was probably the scariest part of the whole trip. We were in the small little town, Aubrey is the place's name. We wanted to hide from the wind because it was just blowing like crazy. So we stopped at this gas station. We got tea for free again as usual. And this guy in normal clothes came to us and he said, no, we must come with him. And we're like, no, go away. And he said, no, we must come with him. And we said, no, we're busy drinking tea. No, you must come, something about security police. And we're like, okay. So we finished our tea, we got up and we went to our bikes, and he said, no, leave the bikes. So we walked with him, and we knew the police station was down the road because we saw it earlier. And we walked there, and we thought we were going to the police station. As we walked past, we see the policeman wave, and we keep moving. So now we're like, this is weird. And we reach this compound, like a house with a high wall. And we go through, and as we enter the house, we turn right to the small little dark room. There's no lights on, there's a computer screen, but nothing else. And he sits us down on a couch. Now we're just there with our camera and our backpacks on this couch, and there's no one else. It's the small dark room. And now I'm thinking, shit, this is the end. And I wanted to text friends of ours, it's actually my wife's father's friends. They stay in Khartoum. We met them there. I wanted to text them and just say, this is where we are, but I didn't have time, and they came to get us again. And we went to this big office with a guy with his military suit behind a huge desk, and there's maps all over. And for about an hour, we couldn't understand what they want from us. And he kept writing stuff off our passports and phoning and asking where we're heading, where we're from. And after a while, we realized they also don't know what they're doing with us. And in the end, they offered us food and lunch, and they had a bowl of sweets. And the one guy asked the other guy to get more sweets. And so it was just the weirdest experience, but I don't think they realized how scary it was for us. So that night, after that, we left for Wadi Halfa. That's the last town in Sudan. And we slept in the desert again, wild camping. But we were so paranoid now, because now we don't know, are they going to come and look for us? Did they phone the next town to wait for us, or what's going on? So we just rode off into the desert until we could almost not see the road anymore, and we just hid there while it was still light in a shadowy corner. And when it was dark, we started pitching our tent, etc. Anyways, yeah. So the next day we went to Wadi Halfa. We managed to get our bikes on the boat. We met up with other tourists that we found along the route, and we slept on the deck of the boat that night. It was just amazing. And on the other side, it was nothing like the long way down, where it was just people everywhere. This was actually much quieter. And the funny thing is, everyone on the boat kept warning us about the crooks in Egypt. They said, don't trust the people in Egypt. But that's the story every time you enter a new country. So on the other side, we had to wait 5 days in Aswan for our bikes. That was quite annoying, because we still wanted to go through the Western Desert. But anyway, so we did a bit of sightseeing, but by that stage we were quite tired, and we're not the usual tourists that like to barter and see all the sights. We just want to get on our bikes and ride. So eventually we got our bikes. We had to decide now, are we going to go straight to Cairo? Because we had 3 days left, and it's still about 700 kilometers. Or are we going to go through the Western Desert, which is about 1,000 miles? So it was quite long. And so that's long days in the saddle. And if something goes wrong, we're going to miss our flight back, because we had a flight booked already back, and we still need to organize the shipping in Egypt. And there's a lot of paperwork, and you have to get Egyptian number plates that you have to give back on the other side, and stamps in your pass. It's a whole mission to get out of Egypt, in and out. And you need fixes for all of it. It's just crazy. And 7 photographs and copies of everything. So we decided to go through the Western Desert, and the first night we slept in the desert. Next night we didn't make it or find a spot in time, so a guy with a donkey cart picked us up and said we must come and sleep at his house. So also a bit weird, but then it was the awesomest experience. His wife just packed out food, and his 2 daughters and little boy tried to chat with us. They in Arabic, we in English, and in the end he actually tucked us into bed. They had a double bed in their living room, and so he waited until we got into bed, put the blanket on top of us, and then asked whether they should switch off the light. So it was weird. And he put our bikes where he has his prayer mat. So in his house, we parked the bikes. He didn't want to leave it outside in this little mud house. So that was just amazing. And the next morning I wanted to pay him something, because they said in the Lonely Planet, always offer something reasonable as a gesture. And he just grabbed my arm and said, no. And he asked me to stay another night, but unfortunately we had to leave. So yeah, that was awesome. And then we slept one more night in the desert, and the last day we had the longest day in the saddle, 600 kilometers, so 400 miles. And by that stage my chain was so badly worn that it started snagging on the teeth. So I stopped and put on the new chain, but that wouldn't work at all. So I had to put back the old one. So we wasted some time there. And now I really had to nurse it. It was like if you pull away, and then once it's running, you can ride. But anyways, we ended up entering Alexandria that night. That's right at the north of Africa, at about 7 o'clock. So it was 2 hours after dark. trying to find a hotel. And the next 2 days we just spent organizing the shipping. Luckily, we met a TV crew. We're making a TV series with 3 4x4s, and they've been doing it many times. So they helped us, and we managed to ship our bikes with them. And I honestly don't know how we would have done it without them in 2 days, because it was really a run around town for 2 full days to get all the paperwork done. And in the end, we flew back and with all our gear, and it was just an amazing trip. It was, looking back, this is probably the easiest way to cross Africa. You can do it on a bicycle and sleep outside. It'll be cheap. It'll just take much longer. Or you can do it in a 4x4. It'll be much more expensive, and there's so much more that can go wrong. Or you can take a cheap Chinese delivery bike. There's spares everywhere. There's know-how everywhere. It's easy to put on the back of a truck, not that we needed it. And yeah, if I had to do it again, I'll probably do it the same way. I'll probably just take an off-road Chinese bike, like the new 250s you get, and I'll do it from the top down next time, so that you're nice and fresh when you start out in the difficult countries, and then as you come to the easier countries, when you get tired, stuff becomes more familiar. Yeah, so hopefully that's on the cards in the near future. Anyways, thank you. If you made it all this way, go and check out adventurebiketroop.com for the gear we use. Check out the recommended gears pages. I'll have a couple of links to specific posts that's relevant. There's one on touring with small bikes and touring with your wife. You can check it out in the description below. And then please consider subscribing and sharing it with your friends. Cheers.